in, Slumpbusters. As part of our continued NBA coverage, we have another outstanding guest to bring you today. Dieter Kurtenbach of the Locked On Network, KNBR, Locked On Warriors specifically, because we're going to be talking a lot of the Golden State Warriors on this little episode here. So, Dieter, first off, how are you doing, good sir?
I'm good. I'm glad it's the All-Star break. I think the Warriors and I were both looking forward to Cleveland in a big way, though I'm not going because I avoid Cleveland at all costs these days.
That is a good principle we'll live by. You actually dropped a video just yesterday, doubt the slumping Warriors at your own peril, and they proceeded to then drop a game to the Denver Nuggets. At the Slumpbuster, we're always dedicated to busting the slump, 100% dedicated to busting the slump around here. What do the Warriors need to do to break this midseason malaise?
Well, I do think that just having some time off will be a big help. What I've noticed is it's been a defensive issue for this team. We can get into some of the offensive stuff, but offense kind of comes and goes. The issue is that they can't stop anybody in the post, and they're not playing very good perimeter defense. And then that manifests into bad rebounding. That manifests into transition points for the other team. It's just kind of a hot mess right now. And while I do think that there's some roster construction issues that have shown up here because they've played small for so long this season, they're riding Kevon Looney probably a little bit too hard. The lack of Draymond Green's coming and biting them in the rear right now. Not having James Wiseman on the team, even just to get 6 fouls in 5 minutes, has been a big pain in the rear. They just look tired. I mean, I haven't seen Andrew Wiggins look this out of it for years, right? This is almost like Timberwolvesian Andrew Wiggins on defense. We saw what Gary Payton II was able to do last night. He had some fresh legs. Suddenly the defense looked pretty good. And yet when the game got down into crunch time, Denver scored 39 points in the fourth quarter because they just couldn't stop Jokic. So I know a lot of people were a little bit up in arms about the lack of any movement at the trade deadline. I look at a team and I wonder how they could have moved anyone for anybody, especially when they're acting from a place of desperation. This team needs Draymond Green back. This team needs another big body, whether that be James Wiseman or somebody from the buyout market. This team needs to get rested and come back out with some urgency. And if they can't show coming out of Cleveland, they have 2 games in like the span of 6 days. So they'll have another kind of quasi break there too. If by, the second week of March, end of the first week of March, they can't show that they can play really good defense without Draymond Green, without perhaps James Wiseman, then they have to really get into a conversation about bringing in another body. But I honestly think most of it is just they're tired, and I get it because I'm tired too.
I love that you're like longing for Tristan Thompson at this point to help solve your problems.
There was a point. There were some conversations that I had with some folks like, would Tristan Thompson be it? And it's like, yeah, I'm not sure. And the irony is that you'd be doing a move on the buyout market, and you're not bringing in anybody who's going to give you serious playoff rotation minutes. This is just a bridge, and that's really tricky, right? Like, because I know that most fans don't care about it, and we shouldn't be counting Joe Lacob's money, but you're paying $8 to $1 on anyone you bring in because you have to cut somebody and you got to pay them out for the rest of the season. And then anyone you're bringing in is on like a $6-7 repeater tax. And yeah, it's for a short period of time. So you're not paying that much money on the minimum, but it's like, damn, man, you're coming in at like $6 million so that you can just have a body for what? I mean, before Wiseman comes back, before Draymond comes back, we're talking maybe a span of 4 or 5 games total if the Warriors are lucky. That seems a little bit rich for my blood, but maybe they can come up with some promotion and get that kind of money in a day. I wouldn't do it. Doesn't sound like Steve Kerr's all that interested. Clearly, Bob Myers wasn't that interested because there was really no traction anywhere on the trade market. And, this is kind of what they wanted to do, right? They wanted to develop on one side and win championships on the other. And I don't even think the San Antonio Spurs did that when they said they were doing it. It might be an impossible principle, but they're going for it. And we've seen with Jonathan Kuminga some really wonderful development. His basketball IQ's off the charts. His athleticism's off the charts. I like what they've done with Moses Moody, even though I think we'll be seeing way less of Moses Moody moving forward. Wiseman's kind of that bridge guy. Wiseman's the one, they messed him up in all sorts of ways last year. They had no idea what they were doing with him last year. They gave a puppy to a 5-year-old, and they're like, how are we supposed to train this thing? And he has the talent, and I think that it might be good for him, honestly, to be in the role that I think the Warriors are envisioning for him when he comes back, and that could be as early as March 1. It's very closed parameters, right? It's very, very clear. do this. Don't do any of that. Just do this for 7 minutes at a time. And that might be good for him, because last year I thought the best basketball he played was when they sort of put some walls up around him. He has all this talent. He's so young. He's so unrefined as a player. He'll explore all the space. And that's no good for anybody. You can't do that at the professional level unless you're like the dude. And by the way, those dudes are very hard to find. And James Wiseman, full stop. I know he's a number 2 overall pick, but he's not one of them.
Well, one of those guys that I think, especially defensively, is Draymond Green. And you mentioned him being injured, kind of feeling like everything's going downhill for them. But even still, the Warriors are number 1 in defensive rating right now in the NBA. So I feel like when people talk about Draymond Green, they don't mention how he's been consistently one of the best defensive players in the NBA for this entire Warriors run. So I wanted to have you talk more about that.
It goes without saying, Draymond Green is the Steph Curry of defense. He's the greatest I've ever seen do it with my own 2 eyes. Now, we can get into conversations about historical greatness and Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain and go down the list, but Draymond Green is the greatest defender that exists on the planet today. And I think that it was easy to forget some things like that, because the Warriors defense did remain at a very high level for a pretty good stretch there once he went out. They haven't had him since Klay came back. They've played a grand total of 7 seconds with all 3 guys on the floor, and all 7 of those seconds Draymond was hobbling. So he's exceptional. He's incredible. He does about 12 things that nobody else could do for the Golden State Warriors. That's not just defense, that's offense too. And it was always going to catch up with them because of the workload that was being put on a guy like Looney, right? And Looney's been an Iron Man this year. He's been incredible. I love Kevon Looney's game. I love what he brings to the team. You can't be playing Kevon Looney 30 minutes a night. You can't do it. He's not built for that. And the fact that they've had to continuously trot him out there tells you how dire the situation is with the big man. And I know this team wants to play small. They should play small. They're best when they play small. But you have to have somebody at the 5 holding everything together in order to play that kind of small ball. I mean, it was all predicated off of Draymond at the 5. That was the initial conceit of the small ball. That's what made this Warriors team so dynastic during that stretch. Kevon Looney ain't that guy. Kevon Looney's a nice secondary option. He can come in, plug you, give you quality minutes, can do a lot of the things that you want your center to do in that system. But as the only other option, that's no good. So they need more Draymond Green. They need to get him in. They need to get him up to speed as soon as possible, because March schedule is just horrendous for them. They have a 5-7 all on the road at the end of the month, leading up to a game against the Suns. It's like, oh my God, whatever they can do early on to get some cushion is necessary. So whatever they can do to get this defense back on track, to kind of get back to where they were at when they went on that 9-game winning streak without Draymond Green, they need to do it. And ultimately, again, I do think that this is just a team that had been going so hard from the jump, by the way. Like from day one, they were out to prove something. That was always they were always going to have to pay the toll on that. Always. And these last 2 or 3 weeks have been the toll. They didn't have the legs to get to the All-Star break. And it showed up. And it showed up in the final minutes of last night's game. They played brilliantly for 3 quarters. And then they ran out of gas. And it's the same thing that happened with this team last year. Went to a 7-man rotation late in the season, figured out what the hell they were supposed to be doing, but they were playing small ball, and then they ran out of gas. So it'll be nice to get some reinforcements in. Wiseman could be a big factor there. Be good to get Andre Iguodala back. I think we need to see more Otto Porter. I think that the rotations will tighten up in due time. We saw that a little bit hinted at in the game against Denver. But Draymond comes in, and suddenly the offense works well, and the defense is the best in the NBA. It is still the best in the NBA today, only because of how much better it was than every other defense in the league before these last 2 or 3 weeks. They're in the bottom third in the NBA in defensive rating over the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, they need Draymond back in a big way. And if they don't get him back, just kiss those title hopes goodbye. They don't stand a chance. You need to have all 4 of your dudes if you're going to have a team built like this. There's nobody who can replace Draymond Green in the league, perhaps in history. So, yeah, they need that guy back.
You talk about needing all 4 of your dudes. I think every NBA fan was happy to see Klay Thompson return here in the last couple months. Klay Thompson is still averaging about 7 minutes less per game than his career minutes played average. How impressed have you been with Klay so far? And when do you think we'll fully see him unleashed?
It's been difficult to say that he hasn't been unleashed. Other than the rotations being a little bit tighter, I don't particularly see any limitation when he's on the court. It's just a matter of ramping up. And I would imagine that would happen game 1 after the All-Star break, because it did sound as if they were pretty close to pulling the trigger on that over the last couple of days. And a lot of things just sort of got pushed to the other side of Cleveland, which makes all the sense in the world. I would expect it in Portland, first game back. That would be my expectation, 30 minutes a night. Now, what have I noticed from him? He's a different player. It is not a bad thing. It's probably a good thing. What he does in terms of spacing is incredible. I think it takes the Warriors offense to another level, and they're going to need to get to that other level because they now have a viable secondary option who can just catch and shoot. And as much as they do have those guys, none of them are Klay Thompson. So that's a very positive thing. Defensively, I'd like to see him thrown in the fire a little bit more. I thought that these last couple of games would have been a good opportunity for him to try to do some more on-ball stuff. And they didn't do it. They kept putting Wiggins out there because that's Wiggins' role on this team. But Wiggins, again, dog tired. He looks gassed. So I thought, hey, maybe throw Klay in there. He's got fresher legs, quote unquote. But they didn't decide to do that. I do think that he could show a little bit more as an off-ball defender. I do think that he could be a little bit more prudent with his shot selection. But I'm not going to hold any of this against him. What he's able to do as a playmaker and a creator now, I do think brings another level to the Warriors offense. I think that they will always close with him. I think that you have a really impressive Final Four that you can get weird and creative with that fifth guy when you're dealing with the four max players in Draymond, Steph, Wiggins, and Klay. That's about as good as you can do for the money, all things considered. So it's good. I expect it to get better. And if it doesn't, I still think it's enough. But I do think that there's more that's ready to be unleashed. This is a guy who still is searching for the feel. And he's copped a couple up until this point. But I don't think that he's in a rhythm yet. I don't feel like he's part of the grind yet. He feels somewhat removed on a minute by minute basis. And we see this manifest in just kind of stupid shots, if we're being honest. And it's very reminiscent of what year was that? It was the year that he broke the single game 3-point record. So my presumption is it would have been the final year that they went to the finals. He sucked for the first month and a half of the season. He sucked something fierce. He was terrible. I ended up calling him in a column, what was it, a Big Lots version of Kobe Bryant. His shot selection was horrendous. He couldn't do anything effectively. It was catching and shooting and going off balance, and it was like way too confident a basketball player. And then he goes off in Chicago against one of the worst defensives I've ever seen in my life. It's amazing that they've gotten this far in this short of a period of time, where the second half, they were just giving up. They were like going for the record with him. And after that, he was just fine. I thought that maybe we'd see the same after Oklahoma City. I don't think that's totally the case, but maybe his head's just spinning a little bit. He'll never admit to it. He's Klay. He's above everything, right? Like he operates on a different plane of existence. But it's a lot. I can only imagine how challenging it has been emotionally, physically, and mentally to jump back in the middle of the season, in the middle of the fray. No, certainly mental ramp up time. Get in there, be awesome, knock down game-winning shot, just do all these things. That's a lot after 2.5 years out. And I would think that this little break might be good for sort of defragging all of those thoughts and getting him into a place where he can kind of, like I was saying with Wiseman, though, with a wider berth, just kind of have some parameters up, not trying out things like, okay, let's be clear and concise with what it is we're doing. Because when Klay is at his best, Klay is clean, right? It's catch, it's shoot, it's perfectly efficient. There's no extracurricular, no nonsense. It seems as if we got in a little bit of nonsense here. He's trying out some stuff. He wants to explore the space. I totally understand where he's coming from. Some of these things are positives that he can carry forward into the playoffs and beyond. But some of the stuff needs to be tampered down a little bit here because, hey, we're in crunch time and we're going to go with the 80% of the things or the 20% of the things that get us 80% of the results. Let's really get down to brass tacks. And I think that, a little bit of time away. And by the way, the Warriors schedule very fruitful for this. And only having 2 games remaining in March and, big gaps in front of the first game back and behind the first game back, I think it's a good opportunity for him to kind of tighten it up a little bit. And if he tightens it up, it's game over. It's game over because Steph needs to tighten it up a little bit. Everyone needs to tighten it up a little bit. But Klay, when he's tight, that dude's dangerous.
I mean, regardless of how things are going right now, the Warriors are now 2.5 years removed from Durant leaving. Klay tore his ACL, then his Achilles, and still got the big extension. And they're as close as you can get to being back to where it was, which is they're competing for a title at this point. So right. I guess what is the change in this turnaround? They missed the playoffs for 2 years. Who would you give some love to that maybe isn't getting the same amount of credit or respect for turning this whole ship around?
Well, it starts with Bob Myers. they didn't win in free agency this past offseason, and they held pretty strong on some of their convictions. I don't know if Bob Myers had full say on some of those convictions. Some of those convictions come on from up top, but he is ultimately the one pulling the trigger, even if somebody's right over his shoulder telling him to pull the lever or whatever. He still has to push that button. He still has some agency here. They didn't win in free agency. The guys that they really wanted, they didn't get. Patty Mills is playing for Brooklyn. I mean, you just kind of go down the list. Guys wanted to go to LA. Guys wanted to go to Brooklyn. And they ended up with Iguodala, who we knew wanted to come back. They ended up with Otto Porter and Nemanja Bjelica. And while Bjelica's kind of been an ass as of late, like Otto Porter is a dude. Otto Porter's a really, really good player. The trade-off, of course, is that the best ability that you have is availability, and you never really know. Same thing with Andre Iguodala. It'll be really interesting to see how they handle those rotations in the coming month plus, final 8 weeks of the season, because those two dudes I want as part of the 8 or 9 or 10 in the final rotation for the Warriors, because they're winning basketball players. Maybe Bjelica can fall out, but it's nice to have him as a break glass in case of emergency guy. Kuminga has been just incredible. I expected him to be incredible at some point. I did not give him enough credit for the basketball IQ that he has displayed. He learns something new every night. But Steph stayed the course. Draymond dogged it for year one, but came back hard in year two. Steve Kerr dogged it in year one, came back hard in year two. And I think that, here's a really offbeat one, but let's credit a guy like Juan Toscano Anderson. Let's credit a guy like Jordan Poole. Let's start with Toscano Anderson. Like, he allowed them to find their best version of basketball last year. Wiseman goes down. They got Looney, but they needed a backup five. And they're in the final 20 games of the season, and they're like, what are we going to do? And they get, Draymond plays the five a little bit, and then Juan Toscano starts playing as sort of an Andre Iguodala, or Juan Toscano Anderson can play the five. And that flexibility, that small ball creativity, that sort of basketball IQ over raw skill set that the Warriors have valued so much. Like, I think they were reminded of that in just seeing Juan Toscano Anderson turn into a viable NBA player who was so critical for them down the stretch last year. Let's also credit a guy, and a bunch of guys, honestly, but let's credit Jordan Poole, who was straight up a bust of a first-round pick. Not an early first-round pick, but a first-round pick nevertheless. A bust up until he went to the G League bubble. And let's credit all those great guys down in Santa Cruz for getting him on time, on schedule, teaching him the principles of 0.5 basketball, which is you make a decision, shoot, pass, dribble in 0.5 seconds, making him think quickly, efficiently. And he came back. He was a different dude. And that different dude unlocked a lot of stuff for the Warriors. It, again, allowed them to find their best version of basketball. And they'll probably be marginalized. I bet Juan Toscano Anderson's out of the rotation. But if they hadn't found success, even in just little tastes last year, as they were fighting for a play-in tournament spot, this year wouldn't be possible. Because as much as everyone wants to bitch and whine and complain, and we've certainly done that already on this, about the lack of size, they did find their best brand of basketball in playing without size last year. And their best brand of basketball at the beginning of this year didn't have some extra 7-footer that, has disappeared now and we can't find him. It was still these dudes. So there's a lot of people who deserve credit. It is a really strong organization. And I know people want to roll their eyes at stuff like that, but I'm seeing a Sacramento Kings hat in the background here. Like, you can ask, organizations matter, man. And Joe Lacob might have some, grand ideas about some stuff, and he might overdo it at times, but he writes the checks, big checks. Bob Myers and Steve Kerr understand what it is they're looking for. They have become more flexible as of late without sacrificing their principles. It's a really good organization, and they should be in this mix for years to come, which is about all you can ask for, because they were never going to be the team again. They were never going to be just, absolute ass kickers again. They were always going to have to just be part of the mix. And honestly, they shouldn't be favored in the Western Conference. The Phoenix Suns should be. They're a better team right now. But you give me Draymond Green and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson in any 7-game series, and I'm betting on them, because I've just seen it too many times. They know not just how to play great basketball, they know how to break wills. And maybe that's past them. Maybe that's over, but I'm not going to believe that until I actually see it. These guys are generational, if not all-time winners. And I'm very interested to see what happens in this postseason, because it could either be a complete disaster, that they ran out of gas. They spent all their energy trying to prove a point at the beginning of the season, and then they didn't have anything left in the tank by the time, the actual points are truly made in the playoffs. or we could be right back in the situation where they're playing for a title, and who knows when they get into a 7-game series with it all on the line. I mean, it took Kevin Durant and how many other guys going down for them to lose that series to the Raptors. And they're convinced to the core that had they won Game 6, they would have gone into Toronto and won. Because I saw Kawhi Leonard moments after that game ended. Dude couldn't walk. I saw Kyle Lowry moments after that ended. Dude couldn't walk. They were on crutches coming out of those games. They wouldn't have made it back to Toronto. They wouldn't. I mean, they would have played, but they were done. They were gone, so they were cooked. And Steph Curry had found something in that Game 6 that he thought he could exploit again and again and again. And if Draymond Green sees that too, you know they're going to exploit it. Let this team and their basketball smarts continue to win the day. They're going to win 7-game series, a lot of them, because of how much smarter they are than any other team I've ever seen in my entire life. That 3-man core with Wiggins now along in tow, with Poole now along in tow, with Kuminga now along in tow, with Otto Porter and all of his smarts, with Andre Iguodala and all of his smarts. I still think basketball IQ matters, and it's hard because I do think Phoenix is awesome. I think they got a lot of basketball IQ too. I don't think these other teams are quite dumb, but I'm really interested to see how the Warriors' basketball intelligence, on court decision-making, processing, critical thinking, how that manifests now at this juncture in what was once a dynasty, and now they're trying to get back to that level. I'm really interested to see if they're able to play the songs they used to play, or if it's going to sound like a really bad reunion tour.
All right, final question for you. A little bit of a fun one here. So we've talked about Wiggins, great story and everything, but All-Star Game starter? Should fans be allowed to continue their vote?
Yeah, they should. You know why? Because people treat the All-Star Game like it's this sacrosanct thing. It's like, have you ever watched an All-Star Game? Like, no one's taking this seriously ever. My only thought is that I need more Korean K-pop guys to like promote my crap on the Mercury News and KMBR and Locked On Warriors podcast. I need that boost. I have been living wrong all this time. All Andrew Wiggins needed was the best season of his career and a K-pop star to say, hey, go vote for this guy, and it would work out. So, I got to get in on this K-pop thing. Otherwise, I'm going to be a dinosaur.
Hey, we're not exactly K-pop here. We're just the Slumpbuster. We're happy to boost you as much as we can on our YouTube channel. So go ahead and check him out at Dieter. Easiest Twitter handle I've ever had to pitch on this show, just at DIETER. Thank you again for coming on. We really appreciate it. Great information, and we'll be happy to share this with our audience. All right, guys. Wonderful. From GG Talk Sports, Kyle Ledbetter and Dieter Kurtenbach, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We will see you next time.